In a galaxy far, far away, Star Wars is a name everyone knows or has heard about. From the endless catalog of games, films, novels, and comics, it's made its way to being the apex of pop culture throughout the decades. And personally, there is a certain appeal to it as a franchise that not only can withstand the test of time, having such nostalgia, but can also continue to build upon itself almost indefinitely. One appeal is the power system. When you have a story in which the power system remains vague yet consistent, there's little worry over power scaling because there are rules set into place that may bend but ultimately should not break. You have the Force. The dark and the light side are easily understood as polar opposites on the superficial level, and those who use them differ in morality, which influences who, how, and why. What makes the Force compelling is how an individual's journey plays in tandem and how they use it to meet their own needs, which can lead to a very binary experience along with variations of characters who go from one side to another. However, that also doesn't mean there are those who aren't neutral, because for the most part, the Force is neutral and can be used as a boon or a weapon depending on the user. But the majority of the mainstream characters we all know and love fall along the lines of either or. So there is no clear path of life in Star Wars. That's kind of the point of the journey of a character who rises like Anakin Skywalker just to fall. Then you have those like Galen Merrick whose journeys begin as a fallen just to rise. You have those who seek to help, aid, and build, and then you have those who hurt, oppress, and destroy. Within these two sides, there are the paths of being a Jedi or a Sith. It's understandable to only view the Jedi and Sith as good versus evil. In my opinion, I don't think it's necessarily just black and white, but I'll get to that shortly. Going back to what I said about the power of the Force and its nature, there are certain abilities that coincide along with either side. There are those who are strong with the Force, who have a deeper connection, a higher midichlorian count, and they are capable of performing unique abilities. For the light side users, and this is a list, that includes, but is not limited to, pyrokinesis, telekinesis, droid disable, Force binding, Force healing, Force light, Force melt, Force persuasion, Force projection, Force stun, Force push, Malachium, Mordecro, protection bubbles, sever, Force, shatterpoint, Phantom and even Force ghost upon death. Sith abilities may include those same powers, but with Force lightning, Force choke, Force repulse, etc. Listen, there are just way too many Force abilities for me to dig into, so I'll just say how there are several characters who are able to utilize special abilities only they are known to have. For instance, Mace Windu has Shatterpoint, which can sense the significance of any event. Cal Kestis in Jedi Fallen Order was able to use Force Echo to catch glimpses of an object, or a location's history, or connection to the Force itself. Galen Merrick in The Force Unleashed was able to perform Force repulsions, which Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader were shown to be capable of, masters even. Not to mention Merrick used Sith Seekers, Force push and lightning combined. He used lightning as a tactical cloak around his lightsaber and body and redirected an already descending Star Destroyer to the ground of Araxis Prime. Note, he didn't pull it out of the sky completely on his own. Of course, gravity played a factor. It was already within orbit. He was just redirecting it, causing it to crash. A feat no one in Star Wars that I know of has done, or at least in the mainstream. In essence, the Force in terms of power is varied, powerful, but most importantly spiritual. That power derives from spirituality. Whether you trust in the light or dark side of the Force, it's not a religion, but a way of life. Not everyone can use it, and some have never heard of it. Though, if you are Force sensitive, then of course you will utilize it to suit your needs. Jedi before Order 66 refused to even learn about the dark side, and that's just one part of reason why the Jedi collapsed. 1. The traditionalists that take Force-sensitive children away from their families to become Jedis in a war that endlessly prepare them against the Sith, but they rarely even go out into the public and try to solve issues on that level. To earn the trust of the people, not only discuss matters with those in power, like the Kaminoans, who clone people to be in an army. The Jedi are the reason for their own downfall because they sit in their council room and meditate all day until the fight comes to them, and only then will they actually retaliate. Otherwise, they'll try to be the not-so-good-at-it diplomats. Ahsoka Tano left the order due to them not trusting her when she was blamed for a crime she didn't even take part in. Jedi leave the order because they can't fall in love or have children like they want to. Sure, there are a few exceptions to this, but it's still frowned upon. because romance is such a strong bond that it leads to passion, and thus peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. This is the code of the Sith, the path to the dark side, and Anakin's love for Padme led him to trusting to Palpatine. Who knows, his love will motivate him to protect and save her to the point where he will use malice and passion in the knowledge of the Sith in order to do so, something the Jedi wouldn't. The Sith are appealing beyond the purely evil supposition because they don't sugarcoat their ideals nor glorify themselves to be righteous or perfect. They understand their position in the galaxy and strive to rise above it. Some are more selfish in that regard than others. They can be honest people who may just be misunderstood, so they have no other choice but to turn to the dark side due to it being more open to ideas than the light. And this is where we see the fine lines between the two as a tad more blurred. They don't want nor need to be heroes or saviors. They see an opportunity, they take it, and then they'll manipulate it, and they'll work with it. So yes, eventually they'll fall to the dark side so much that they'll lose themselves in that corruption like Palpatine. Luke taught us that no one is beyond redemption, like Vader and Kylo Ren. Palpatine is kind of an oddity because even before he fell far in with the dark side, he was a thrill seeker, so naturally he had always taken pleasure from coming close to death and having that adrenaline course through his veins. But with the movies, they never really paint him to be a good dude, and I think partly that is the case from a development standpoint due to his core personality of wanting to be in control. Anakin and Kylo weren't as controlling thrill seekers like Palpatine in his younger days, therefore they were redeemable. Still, they're not just all a bunch of emo metalheads who yell and fight aggressively and preach about power. Yeah, power can be a motive, but so can love. Power will save love. Power will defeat their adversary, and power will unlock the truths of the galaxy. Old Jedi scrolls and archives will remain in the past, and that's essentially why they never learn from their mistakes, because they look to the past instead of looking at what the rest of the galaxy has to offer, while the Sith try to learn everything and anything they can in the current moment to prepare for the future. Even if it's sinister. The only way the Jedi guide themselves is through counselors. Jedi counselors can see a glimpse of the future, which means they can have the most important role in the council. But as we have learned with Knights of the Old Republic comic, the Jedi counselors had foreseen one of the Padawans who would one day destroy the Order and cause a great chaos. They were so convinced that they were right that they decided to slaughter their own group of Padawans and place the blame onto Zane Carrick. Because he was an easy fall guy for the most part. He's clumsy and unarguably the weakest combatant and Force user among those Padawans. But you see, what I find to be appealing about Star Wars is the sense of moral ambiguity that can be pushed when needs to, not when it's just a matter of good versus bad. The Jedi in the Old Republic decided to place faith and trust into their own visions to be so certain that it would happen that they would rather sacrifice those few innocent lives to prevent one potential threat that may or may never even be real. And here's how Zane Carrick responded. I'll hunt down and kill all of you in return, one at a time. The one who confesses will live. And by any means, if I do end up collapsing the Jedi Order because of this, just remember that you started this. Zane Carrick in the Knights of the Old Republic is relatable and a solid protagonist up until the point that I've read because of this one moment that truly summed up his journey up until that point, going from who he was, being someone capable, clumsy, and afraid of not being as good as his classmates, being the only person who would be least expected to murder them in cold blood, to someone who is unafraid to challenge his master and the entire order, going rogue. He turns all of this around them, making them the targets instead of making himself one, proving his innocence along the way. He embraces the fact the Jedi are corrupt and need to be stopped. It isn't right to do any of this, and the story tugs at the very moral ambiguous argument that Jedi are not all good as they claim to be. What makes this comic so appealing in contrast to the recent movie trilogy is how Zane is not the chosen one. He's not of a powerful bloodline. He's simply a young man who has been pushed by society, so he decided to push back. And he doesn't have a Sith in his ear to manipulate him. He doesn't have a master to give advice. I think Star Wars is appealing and I guess you could say in a way speaks to modern day politics. In a way serves as a figurative metaphor, however deep you want to consider it. And it's at its best when the main leads are not trying to fulfill some prophecy or lead the good guys to freedom. It's about a story of ambiguity, love, passion, betrayal, blindside, and complacency. And not to mention what irrational thought behavior patterns and how someone's current circumstance will radicalize them to some faraway corner of judgment. A lot of that has been happening in today's society, and I think Star Wars is a great mirror into that. The movies simply tell the bare minimum, and they do a good job for the most part, but they miss out on a lot of core wounds and core truths about reality and the way people operate on a psychological level. Maybe I'm just kind of glazing it a bit, but I like the sci-fi nature of rebellions and leading political games with senates and trying to overthrow establishments. It's just whenever Disney tries to go outside of that box and tell Star Wars on the molecular level that they fail to do it in any way that's better than the actual books and comics that can offer so much more than what the movies are able to do because of budget and just a bunch of different behind the scenes politics. I don't know. But I will say one of my favorite characters is Revan. Revan was a military genius brainwashed into being a Jedi for the second time after being a Sith Lord and didn't even realize it. Some say he had become a Sith to prevent a bigger threat or evil, so he kind of falls along that lines of, I will be the one to bear this burden so that no one else has to. He's a character who makes us think about whether or not it's okay to become someone hated if it's only to stop someone from doing much more or much worse. I won't get into the whole resurrection thing and how Revan literally had so much willpower he willed himself back to life until he could defeat the Emperor, just to know that that was a thing. And other than that, I recognize Revan as someone who brings a new perspective onto what it means to be conflicted. Rey, without the resistance and an army to fight, is just once again a nobody with nothing else to do or strive for other than finding belonging, which is fine. That should have just been her whole character to begin with. It didn't need to be, oh, she's a Skywalker, oh, she's a Palpatine, who is she really? It kind of fell flat, and this is a huge critique on the movies, but Snoke is similarly placed in that predicament and is also kind of a foreshadowing for what Rey would later become. They built these characters up to be no one. Despite them having every indicator of being connected to someone greater, they are ultimately no one. Snoke is nobody, and Rey chooses to be someone she's not. She is no Skywalker. I mean, what does it mean to be a Skywalker? Is she worthy enough of being a Skywalker? Do you have to save the galaxy to be a Skywalker? Do you have to wield the lightsaber to be a Skywalker? What does it mean, I get that they're trying to teach the point of you can choose who you want to be, but it doesn't really work all that well, and it's not super effective if your character is just fundamentally dislikable. I mean, at first her character had some direction, but now she's just kind of a nostalgia fan service. You see, the main reason Anakin fell to the dark side was because he had no one to trust and look up to when he began having these precognitions about Padme's death. #daddy issues. Obi-Wan suspected their relationship. He wasn't around when he needed to be. As the chosen one, he should have been priority. This is a heavy burden to hold, and no one even took the time to properly be a father figure to this young boy because they saw him as a threat and a weapon for, again, a war that was so far off into the future, but also is now popping up out of nowhere, and they're super scared and they don't know what to do, so now they're just gonna sit and wait for them to come back. Awesome. Great decision making, guys. You're really doing your best here, I can tell. You've definitely learned from the past that you talk so much about anyway. He didn't need any more rules and a brother. He needed more of a father. And Kenobi was a good brother figure to him. I'm not going to take that away from Obi-Wan, but he was far too experienced to be that kind of father figure for Anakin because he didn't quite pull on that emotional side of being more of an authority figure. He was just kind of like the annoying big brother, and that led Anakin to being more rebellious. Qui-Gon, on the other hand, was perfect because he got on his knees and he leveled himself with Anakin. No secrets, no lies. And if Qui-Gon would have lived to train Anakin, I firmly believe they could have prevented his fall to the dark side. Qui-Gon wasn't like any other. I mean, he was more or less a gray Jedi that nonetheless still fought to protect and serve, but didn't fully commit to the Order's regulations and teachings, which I personally would identify myself as, I would probably be closer to a gray Jedi than anything, because I feel like they have the ideals that would make better decisions. And you could also say that, well, if Mace Windu had trained Anakin, things could have still been better than what happened in Revenge of the Sith, and he probably would have trusted Anakin enough to teach him the pod, his own unique form of lightsaber dueling that incorporated using both light and dark side of the Force, which would have been perfect for Anakin not only to push back Palpatine's influence and control his emotions, but to also understand the full aspect of the Force without losing sight of who he is in the process. Palpatine may have studied both, but he was far too ingrained in the dark side, as Mace, more than anyone, knows what it's like to feel that tug between justice and passion. To save his lover, he needs power, but to gain power, he needs to trust in the dark side. You get where I'm going with this? All Anakin really needed was someone to trust within the Order who didn't shut themselves completely under the traditions of the Council. So Star Wars has always promoted this message of love. The prequels tell us a story where love is taken away or subdued by people who believe it corrupts. As this love is forced to be kept secret, it drives Anakin to the brink where he can't openly express it and get the help he clearly needs, all because the Jedi believed that love is the path to the dark side, which is clearly not true. The originals tell us a story where love is what wins in the end. Luke not killing his father, and Anakin betraying the Emperor to save his son and fulfilling what we believe to be the prophecy. Yoda and Obi-Wan believed that he was far too gone and that Luke should have just killed him to save the galaxy. And I mean, Han and Leia's relationship was also strengthened throughout the original trilogy, which further alluded to the theme of hope, to victory and freedom, from oppression or exile or fear or destruction or abandonment. Star Wars tells us a story about people who want something better for themselves and others they love, but aren't the ultimate heroes we see them as. There are people who can be swayed, manipulated, betrayed, and beaten down to the core where they may lose their will to carry on. It doesn't matter who they think is right. We can believe in Kylo Ren's redemption, like Rey. We can believe in Vader's redemption, like Luke. Then when we saw the Jedi at their prime, we understood the fall of not just Anakin, but the Order as well. And the biggest culprits to blame are the Jedi, in my opinion. Everything could have ended differently if they weren't so blinded by tradition and fear of the Sith. They spent more time trying to keep an eye on the Senate and Palpatine that they neglected the Chosen One's feelings, which should have been more important since they had already seen so much anguish and fear in him at a young age. Who would have thought, without having known who he later becomes, that the same Anakin who rolled around in a field having a picnic teasing Padme and telling her his dislikes of sand would be the same young man who slaughtered countless people with an army at his command? The Jedi Council feared him, and they were too reluctant to act on it due to their fear of the Sith gaining diplomatic control, even when they had little to no true evidence, mostly going off of what Anakin said. So kudos to Mace Windu for being a star player in his own death. If this dude Palpatine hurls like a football at 4 Jedi and then slays 3 of them in less than 10 seconds, then you should have just ended them when you had the chance. In all seriousness though, a part of the Jedi's downfall was that their authority was absolute, or at least relative. They acted when they felt as if they needed to be, usually when a Sith is involved, and because of that, people began to see them as the enemy. At that moment, even Anakin began to realize this. Mace was going to execute Sidious without him even having a fair trial, or without any evidence to use against him. So I guess Sidious pulling out a red lightsaber wasn't enough to prove him some right? Considering how Kyber crystals gain their respective colors, red isn't for show. In Legends, a Force user pours their dark emotions, their pain and their hatred onto a Kyber crystal, and that is what forces them become red. So you never see anyone from the council with a red saber, right? I mean, that shows enough. And as my final comment, I will just briefly say that the galaxy of Star Wars and each of its respective worlds are truly unique, different from any other franchise in terms of world building, cinematic relevance, and themes. Coruscant and Taurus were the big city and flying car planets that were the center of the Jedi Council, Hoth being a snow planet, Kashyyyk and Endor being a jungle forest terrain, Tatooine being a desert, Mustafar being not only just a volcanic planet, but also one of my favorites, mostly because of Revenge of the Sith. The Anakin and Obi-Wan fight is my #1 favorite fight in the entire franchise because it's the iconic climax of two brotherly young men in the prime of their power fighting for what they believe in. So much history and weight and burden and emotion on the line. The fate of the galaxy literally depends on this battle, and Yoda versus Sidious as a juxtaposed fight shows that there are parallels. The fact that whoever wins will depict the future. And the thing is, even though Anakin lost the high ground, clearly he didn't learn from Obi-Wan. But because Palpatine won, Obi-Wan and Yoda were sent into exile as the last of the Jedi, apart from several others who survived Order 66, but eventually was hunted down anyway. It just goes to show that just one planet that a single prominent scene takes place on can cause the ladder of the Skywalker saga to be the way that we know it is today. That's the significance of world building intertwined with the story. How set dressing can actually be a crucial, pivotal core memory. And apart from those few planets, there are dozens more, like in Kamino, or Alderaan, Dantooine, Cloud City, Felucia, Raxus Prime, or Nar Shaddaa. These all have their own histories and civilizations, which I won't get into because then this video would be an hour long. But primarily to the masses and general audience, Star Wars may seem like it's a movie series that's for young boys who crave space battles, laser guns, and glowing swords with robots and weird cantina aliens and Jabba the Hutt and Jar Jar Binks and old men in robes and space Nazis. But truly, I see the appeal as potential to capture so many of these aspects all into one, hone them, and then be able to interpret reality as something a bit more science fiction and epic. That's what Star Wars feels like to me. It's an epic. If you see a lightsaber duel, then I see a clash of well-trained warriors who either use the same or different forms of combat that could be a major factor in terms of who will win. I see combat sports. Whoever does win will determine the fate of countless lives, but I can also see this is just pure manly chess game. You know, it's like Count Dooku's water-esque movement and his lightsaber form being so difficult to counter, which has provided such a problem for so many other duelists. Then you have Yoda's acrobatic style utilizing the environment for leverage to compensate for his height. And that's also difficult to counter. You know, it's like two heavyweight champs going toe to toe. That's why it matters to see who will win. It's not just for the story and emotional ties, but it's also a spectacle to see who, as warriors, will take on the victory. Show that their combat is superior, that their ideals and convictions are superior, that their training is effective. And this even causes so much fun and debates of who will win. The worlds and species and the lore, the duels, the themes, the characters, and all in all, I see the true appeal of Star Wars as something that mirrors reality. And that's not just a figure of speech, it's a real sentimental feeling in my bones. And for that very reason, I have spoken.